I'll stand where there be on heels, but I'm technically short.
You're speaking, right? Yeah. So, I don't want to.
Yeah, you don't want to just freeze. Oh, there we go.
Everybody. Hi, good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you all so very much.
Line up and,
Yeah.
okay. Diane, either way.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Wow, they must be interested in this.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Welcome. This is a day that it's finally come. Today in America, we anticipate there'll be 20,000 calls placed to domestic violence hotlines in our country. And that's because in the next minute, 60 seconds, we can expect nearly 20 people in America to be physically abused by an intimate partner in our country. According to a 2021 report from the World Health Organization, nearly 1 in 3 women living today have experienced some form of physical or sexual violence. These statistics are a sobering reminder that the crisis of sexual and domestic violence touches every community in the world, every community in our nation, and they emphasize how critical it is for Congress to respond. Today you see before you an amazing gathering, bipartisan gathering, of women and men in the United States Senate who are determined to make a difference and to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. Senator Feinstein, Senator Ernst, Senator Murkowski, and I are announcing that the Senate is finally responding by introducing a bill to reauthorize and modernize the Violence Against Women Act. Since its enactment in 1994, the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, has transformed the way we address domestic and sexual violence in America. It is a life-saving law that aims to ensure every survivor can reach a lifeline in a moment of crisis. Our VAWA Reauthorization Act of 2022, which we'll introduce today, will update and strengthen the law to ensure that it can meet the current needs of survivors, increase prevention, and improve the response to violence. Our bill is a compromise. It doesn't include everything that Senator Feinstein and I wanted or everything Senator Ernst and Murkowski wanted. And there are provisions that all 4 of us very much wanted to include, such as an end to the loophole that allows abusers who harm dating partners to continue to have access to guns. But we agreed that we had to introduce a bill that would both deliver the critical assistance survivors across America need and achieve the necessary bipartisan support and pass the Senate. We are confident that the agreement we reached will do just that and has a path forward to becoming be signed into law by President Biden. Today reminds us that when vulnerable Americans are facing significant challenges and barriers, it's still possible for members of Congress to come together on a bipartisan basis, solve a problem, and work to find even more solutions. I'm grateful to my colleagues and partners in this effort. Some of them will have a moment now to express their opinion on where we stand today. And for those who've given up hope on the United States Senate functioning, passing important laws, working together on a bipartisan basis, take a look behind me. I'm honored to stand alongside these women and men in the Senate as we work together to move this bill forward. I will now turn to my partner in this effort, and I want to commend her for the extraordinary job she did, as well as Senator Murkowski and Senator Feinstein, Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa.
Thank you, Dick, so much. Thank you so much, Dick, and to all of my colleagues. God bless you. To those advocacy groups that are here with us today, we want to thank them so much for their wonderful support through the last several years that we have been working on this reauthorization. So, folks, I'm a survivor. I know firsthand what happens when someone you trust abuses you. In college, I worked at a victim shelter, answering the hotline, and I've heard heartbreaking stories of abuse. For 3 years, I've been working diligently on modernizing and strengthening the Violence Against Women Act. I have worked closely with Chairman Durbin, thank you, sir, and Senator Feinstein, a dear friend and partner, along with Senator Murkowski, as well as a number of stakeholders, and they're all standing here today, on a bipartisan solution that would not only reauthorize VAWA, but truly modernize it. I'm encouraged by the support of many of my Republican colleagues, including Senators Collins and Senator Capito, and I thank you all for joining us. I believe we must provide better resources for survivors in their own communities. I'm happy to say we've bolstered the amount of support for our rural communities, something that is extremely important to me, just like the community that I grew up in and I still reside in. These resources will help rural survivors who are so often forgotten. Another important piece of this bill is the effort to prevent sexual violence. We have increased support for the Rape Prevention and Education Program. Instead of reacting to these horrific crimes, this program works to prevent them from happening in the first place. We've also included my bipartisan bill with Senator Blumenthal to make sure that perpetrators who abuse women in custody cannot avoid justice. Folks, I've said time and again throughout this process, I want to come to a solution that won't just be a political talking point for one side or the other, but a bill that can gain bipartisan support needed to pass the Senate and truly deliver for my fellow survivors of these life-altering abuses. We cannot avoid this reality, folks. People need these resources, and today, I am so thankful to say, is the first step in making this bill become law. Thank you so much. I will now be followed by my friend and colleague, Senator Dianne Feinstein.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for all the years, and it's been a lot of years. So I want to thank everybody up here, and beginning with you, Dick, and all the women that have gotten together and done this. But I walked in, and I thought, oh my goodness, look at the numbers. They must really like the bill. And then I figured, you know, could it be one California woman who has come here from a city known as Los Angeles? And I think it may be part of that. I would never, a good part of it, never assume that it is us. So we're coming together to introduce bipartisan legislation to reauthorize and update the Violence Against Women Act. And I think it's especially significant that this bill has the support of so many of our colleagues from both sides of the aisle, 9 Republicans and 9 Democrats. The bill is a result of a really true bipartisan effort. So I want to thank, and others have as well, Senator Ernst, Senator Durbin, Senator Murkowski, and these were the 3 that began this effort with us. The bill was also written in close collaboration with the people who are on the front lines helping survivors of domestic violence every day. So together, we've drafted a bill that preserves the good work of the last reauthorization bill in 2013. And it strengthens existing programs to support survivors and to prevent and to respond to domestic violence. And that's dating violence, it's sexual assault, it's stalking. And to be specific, it enhances and expands services for survivors of domestic violence, including survivors in rural communities, LGBT survivors, survivors with disabilities. It reauthorizes and strengthens the criminal justice response, thank goodness, to domestic violence. We've all seen that, we've all seen the problems, and this aims to do something about it. It makes important improvements to the Justice Department's STOP grant program and improves its ability of individual courts to address instances of domestic violence on federal land. tribal land. And it invests in prevention, education efforts, and will help improve the healthcare system's response to sexual violence. Now, this isn't a perfect bill, and I regret that the boyfriend loophole is not addressed. And many of us have tried very hard to get there. But it's a good bill, and we need to finally get a Violence Against Women Act reauthorization to the President's desk. So let me thank everybody here for working on this. It's not perfect, but it's a big advance. So thank you so much. And now, Senator Murkowski, distinguished senator from the great state of Alaska.
Diane, thank you. And thank you to my colleagues that have worked so hard and so long, as has been noted, as we have gotten to this place where we are poised to advance a reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. Chairman Durbin, thank you for your leadership over the years. Senator Feinstein, thank you. Senator Ernst, I want to particularly share my thanks. You have had to navigate some particularly interesting matters, and I think you have done so with a deft and a graciousness that really allows you to lead in an area where so many are looking to you for that. We have a big group of interested folks here today. Yes, we are graced with the presence of Angelina Jolie, and we're very appreciative of that and her extraordinary advocacy. But I think that this is also very telling as we look to those who have gathered here. This is an issue that we care about. This is an issue that brings about passion and emotion. And I will tell you that even under your masks, I've seen tears that have welled up at this announcement that we are at this point, that perhaps, just perhaps, we're going to avoid VAWA being the political football. Because when vulnerable people are at risk, the most offensive thing that we can do is further compound the tragedy that they have faced by not being able to come together on their behalf. And that's what we have been able to do. It's been hard, but the bipartisan efforts that you see here have reinforced the imperative. I live in a beautiful state, but we have an ongoing crisis of violence in Alaska. More than half of Alaska women surveyed in the 2020 Alaska Victimization Survey have experienced intimate partner violence, sexual violence, or both in their lifetime. It is imperative that we address these matters. It's imperative that we address these issues. I am very proud to have worked on the tribal title contained within this VAWA legislation. In 2013, we recognized the inherent tribal jurisdiction, but we knew that we needed to allow for modernization and expansion, and we have done that within this title. We go further in recognizing that in Alaska, due to jurisdictional complexities, due to geography, isolated communities with sparse population, you can have a situation where you have literally no law enforcement whatsoever, no presence whatsoever, no safety whatsoever. And so being able to address this through our Alaska Public Safety Empowerment Act, recognizing what we do to protect Native women by improving tribal access to federal crime information and databases, what we do to provide additional access for forensic care for all victims of interpersonal violence. Every victim needs to know that there can be a path to justice. That's what we're trying to do here. And it's not perfect. It is a subject of compromise. But compromise will help ensure that more women are safer. And that's our goal today. And with that,
And then we will have Miss Jolie, if you don't mind a few words, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Standing here at the center of our nation's power, I can think only of everyone who's been made to feel powerless by their abusers, by a system that failed to protect them. Parents whose children have been murdered by an abusive partner, women who suffered domestic violence yet are not believed, children who've suffered life-altering trauma and post-traumatic stress at the hands of people closest to them. Anyone who's been in those situations will tell you just how far they feel from the power concentrated here in this building. The power to pass laws that might have prevented their pain in the first place. The reason that many people struggle to leave abusive situations is that they've been made to feel worthless. When there is silence from a Congress too busy to renew the Violence Against Women Act for a decade, it reinforces that sense of worthlessness. You think, I guess my abuser's right. I guess I'm not worth very much. That's why passing this law is one of the most important votes you as senators will cast this year. The ugly truth is that violence in homes is normalized in our country. Between 4 and 7 children die daily in America from child abuse and neglect, and 800 children have been murdered by a separating parent since 2008. The idea of sovereignty of a family home is being used to abuse the members within it. But victims of abuse in this country who deserve consideration and respect and attention of Congress as much, if not more, than any other crisis we face. As survivors of abuse know all too well, victims of our failed systems are not allowed to be angry. You're supposed to be calm and patient and ask nicely. But you try staying calm when it's as if someone is holding your head underwater and you're drowning. Try to stay calm when you're witnessing someone you love being harmed. Try to stay calm if after you were strangled and you find the courage to come forward, you discover that your chances of proving the abuse are now gone because no one took into account the different ways bruising presents on black and brown skin, and they failed to check properly for signs of injury. I am in awe of the parents who, after the murder of their children, have fought to change the law to protect the next child. Parents like Anna Estevez, mother of Piki, Kathy Sherlock, mother of Caden. Even though that means reliving every day the horror and pain and loss, and remembering how they begged for help to protect their child and were belittled and ignored. There are people in this room who have suffered abuse and been denied justice, but have worked for years to ensure that this VAWA reauthorization achieves certain basic protections that no survivor should have to ask for, like Caden's Law, or funding for non-racially biased forensic evidence collection, or the jurisdiction to prosecute non-Indian perpetrators of sexual assault, child abuse, and sex trafficking on tribal land. These protections are urgently needed, so I repeat, this is one of the most important votes you will cast this year in the Senate. I'm very grateful to the National Task Force to End Sexual Violence and Domestic Violence, and its many members and advocates, including Rachel, Karma, Carrie, Kelby, Condencia, and many others, for all they have done to advance survivor voices and legal protection. I am grateful to Senators Durbin, Ernst, Feinstein, and Murkowski for their leadership on this issue and for inviting me to speak. And most of all, I want to acknowledge the children who are terrified and suffering at this moment, and the many people for whom this legislation comes too late. The women who have suffered through this system with little or no support, who still carry the pain and trauma of their abuse, the young adults who have survived abuse and emerged stronger, not because of the child protective system, but despite it, and the women and children who have died, who could have been saved. Thank you.
Ruth Glenn. Thank you, Ruth.
Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be in this room with you all, supporting the introduction of VAWA bill. My name is Ruth Glenn, and I am a pre-VAWA survivor of domestic violence. I am a survivor from the time before prevention programming and coordinated community responses were available. The Violence Against Women Act addresses domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking holistically. VAWA challenges us to continue to ask what pieces need to be in place and what systems need to work to ensure survivors can access comprehensive services and achieve safety. It is the answer to the question, what needs to happen to ensure others who are abused do not end up like I did after years of abuse. On the ground, having been shot, bullets in my head and my body. I am now the president of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, an organization that proudly amplifies the voices of victims and survivors and the advocates who support them. This VAWA reauthorization recognizes that life is complicated and so is domestic violence. Survivors are not one-dimensional. Individual survivors have different needs and different life circumstances. Some live in rural communities, and others live in urban communities. Some have children, and others do not. Some need housing, some need advocacy, and some need different types and modes of health care. Some survivors reach out to law enforcement. Some don't. They reach out to their communities. Some survivors are young people. Some are older adults. Some have disabilities, and some do not. This VAWA recognizes that every survivor and their myriad of issues are different. This VAWA will meet survivors where they are with responses and services specific to their needs. NCADV, that's the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, appreciates the leadership of Senators Feinstein, Ernst, Murkowski, and Durbin, and their teams in introducing the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2022. NCDV also thanks our fellow members of the National Task Force to End Sexual and Domestic Violence, the NTF. The NTF has been a coalition behind VAWA since its inception. I also want to take a moment to thank the advocates on the ground who have devoted their lives to working with survivors and victims. Advocates are the backbone of this nation's response to gender-based violence. And with this bill, the Senate has committed their support to them as well. Thank you. You're welcome. With that, I would like to introduce my friend and colleague, Monica Johnson.
Thank you, Ruth. My name is Monica Johnson Hostler, and I'm the president of the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence, one of the cornerstone founding members of the National Task Force to End Sexual and Domestic Violence. I'd first like to thank Senator Durbin, Feinstein, Ernst, and Murkowski for your diligent hard work to ensure that we are able to stand here today with the introduction on the Senate side. thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all the work, time, energy, and you've put into this. I'd also be remiss if I didn't thank the countless number of hours that your staff have put into this to ensure that they hear the voices of the survivors on the ground and the many members of the National Task Force to End Sexual and Domestic Violence. Thank you, staff. Your work is not gone unnoticed, and it certainly is not done. So thank you, and just remember those thank yous on the late nights. We certainly appreciate the work and energy that you put into this. I've been very fortunate that this is the fourth reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act that I've been involved in. I started when I was very young. But I think it's important to note for someone, I started working in local services in the early 90s, just before the Violence Against Women Act was initially authorized. And what I can tell you about the work that happened after VAWA was the partnerships and the collaborations in the rural community in North Carolina that I worked in will forever be changed. There were not conversations, there were not sexual assault nurse examiners, and there certainly were not collaborative partnerships to ensure that we were centering the needs of all sexual violence survivors in our rural community in North Carolina. Likewise, a decade later, I joined as the executive director of the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault. We were one of the last coalitions to be established with staff, and we were established as staff because of the Violence Against Women Act Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Coalition funding. So I stand before you saying I know firsthand the impact of the Violence Against Women Act has had on the ground for those of us who spend our lives, days and nights, in the trenches. So on behalf of all of my colleagues who work on the front lines, who are survivors, who serve survivors and continue to center survivors, we appreciate the strengthening that this Violence Against Women Act introduction will bring to modernize the bill that has forever changed many of our lives by making these paid positions and lifting up the importance of centering the survivors that we serve. The National Alliance to End Sexual Violence serves 56 state and territorial coalitions and over 1,500 rape crisis centers throughout the country. Those 1,500 rape crisis centers have served over 55,000 clients with the help of the Sexual Assault Services Program that was introduced in VAWA after a decade of being instrumental. I bring that up because the importance is with each reauthorization of VAWA, we've been able to see the change in our communities, and survivors have been served in ways that they weren't able to be served before. The cornerstone legislation has been paramount to our work. Senator Ernst mentioned the Rape Prevention Education Act. My first job in that rural county in North Carolina was talking to our young people to ensure that they understood that they had rights, bodily autonomy, and knowledge and a supportive adults to be allies to ensure that we create protective factors to keep all of our children in all of our communities safe. These are just two monumental programs that are a part of the Violence Against Women Act that will continue to be strengthened once we see the Violence Against Women Act going through the Senate, through the House, and to the President's desk. Again, I'd be remiss to say I'd like to thank all of my colleagues that Ms. Jolie mentioned that have done the omens work to get us here. So for all of you who aren't standing with us today, your work is forever etched in the Violence Against Women Act. Thank you. And I'd now like to turn it over to Commissioner Michael Harrison.
Good afternoon. First, let me start by thanking survivors and advocates for sharing today. And to Senator Feinstein, Ernst, Senator Durbin, Senator Murkowski, thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's event on the VAWA Reauthorization Act. My name is Michael Harrison. I'm the Police Commissioner for the City of Baltimore, but I'm here on behalf of the Major City Chiefs Association, a professional association of law enforcement executives representing the largest cities in the United States and Canada. The Major City Chiefs Association is proud to endorse the bipartisan Senate compromise of the VAWA Reauthorization Act. Reauthorizing these vital programs is long overdue, and this legislation will provide critical resources to support survivors of domestic violence. The bill will also provide additional tools to assist law enforcement in responding to, investigating, and prosecuting these heinous crimes. The Major City Chiefs Association, however, is incredibly disappointed that this bipartisan compromise does not include the boyfriend loophole. This common sense reform has been an MCCA priority for several years. And due to the boyfriend loophole, some individuals convicted of domestic violence crimes can still possess a firearm under federal law because their victim did not fall into one of the few categories specifically listed in the statute. Police chiefs see the horror of gun violence every day. Sadly, there have been far too many cases where these offenders use these firearms to commit further violence against their victims, others in the community, and even against law enforcement officers. The relationship between a convicted perpetrator of a domestic violence and their victim should not be the factor that determines if the individual can possess a firearm under federal law. The Major City Chiefs Association's members continue to respond to an increase in violent crime, including domestic violence. Simply put, closing the boyfriend loophole will only improve public safety. Our agency strongly urges Congress to consider adding a provision to the VAWA Reauthorization Act to close the boyfriend loophole as it moves through the legislative process and remains committed to working with all stakeholders to get this done. Senators, thank you again for the opportunity to participate in today's event, and thank you for your continued leadership. At this time, I'll bring up Eric Olson.
Good afternoon. My name's Eric Olson. I'm a prosecutor in Virginia, and I'm here on behalf of the National District Attorney Association. Monica, I got you beat. I started doing this business in the late 80s. And I can tell you, you're exactly right. The landscape in domestic violence investigations and prosecutions was so different back then. And the landscape changed starting in 1994 with the first authorization of VAWA. So I think it's something to note, the reauthorization here today. NDA would like to thank Senator Ernst, Feinstein, Durbin, Senator Murkowski. Senator Lee, are you here? Leahy. Senator Leahy, I'm sorry. You were a member of NDA, were you not?
I was president-elect of NDA, and I gave it up for the glory, for the anonymity.
And you, yes. And you miss your old job, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Thank you for leading this bipartisan effort towards reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. As a domestic violence and child abuse prosecutor for a long time, I can tell you that over the decades, this act has been essential to combating domestic violence by providing services and resources to victims and supplying the tools to prosecutors and law enforcement officers. I'm 60 years old. You can't do that to me. To prosecutors and law enforcement.
Not a political
To hold offenders accountable. The power dynamic at the core of domestic violence presents barriers to law enforcement officers and to prosecutors when we're faced with this terrible crime, violence against women, violence within families. We strive to engage survivors of domestic violence in wraparound services. We strive to support them so they feel safe, so they can come forward. And thanks largely to the resources provided by past authorizations of this act, state and local prosecutors are now well trained to strike that delicate balance between victim support and perpetrator accountability. It's not an easy thing to do. We're grateful that this reauthorization will continue to provide that support. For decades, we've tried to place the focus of domestic violence on the perpetrator, the one using the power and control in that relationship. The 2022 Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act takes important steps to ensure that the power is not placed back in the hands of the abuser, but instead empowers victims to take back control of their lives. The new authorization provides funding for innovative practices to support victims within differing jurisdictions. We know that to be the case as prosecutors. Over 50% of the state and local prosecutors are in rural jurisdictions with no resources. It's so important. And we can still ensure that these programs do not hinder or interfere with ongoing criminal investigations into domestic violence. Further, the bill carves out best practices, training to assist prosecutors in our ongoing efforts to place the safety and the needs of the victim, the survivors, at the forefront of domestic violence investigations and prosecutions. I met two women here today that I had not met before. Both are survivors of domestic violence. One's a U.S. Senator, and one's the president of a national advocacy group. That is empowering, and that's a message that needs to get out. So again, NDA thanks Senator Durbin, Murkowski, Feinstein, and Ernst for leading this important effort. We look forward to joining with all our partners here today, across the administration, across the advocacy community, in getting the legislation across the finish line. It's too important to not happen. Thank you.
Take some questions.
I'm wondering when do you have a sense of when this might come to the floor?
It won't be next week. So don't, I know we're anxious, but we want to make sure we're prepared on the floor. We're perilously close to 60 votes.
Oh, yes.
With
Oh,
it.
yes.
Good. We want to be there. We want to get this right. We want to pass it in the Senate. So I know Senator Schumer is tuned in. He wants to call this as quickly as we can. Yeah.
With respect to the boyfriend loophole, since you did have to close the boyfriend loophole, since you did have to take it out, are there any plans to bring it up separately?
I would like to. I think if we could possibly have a vote on the floor, but we have to work in the context of a Senate with some very arcane rules. And I favor it. I'd like to see a vote on the floor, and we'll press forward, see where we... Well, you need 60 votes. And in order to get anywhere near 60 votes, that provision became controversial, and we had to measure the remainder of the bill against that provision. It's a tough choice, and we made the choice we thought was right. And as I mentioned, I'd like to see a separate opportunity to vote on that measure on the floor. I don't know if we can get it. There's no guarantee. I don't know that there's been any official White House endorsement, but... Well, they've contacted me several times as chairman of the committee and asked if this was a priority, and I assured them it was. Even though it didn't go through the formal committee process, it had a better process, a full Senate process, and the senators who were here and were mentioned really did an amazing job, particularly on the Republican side. I want to congratulate you, Joni, and Lisa, Shelley as well, for reaching out in their caucus. We started with a good, solid vote, but we needed more, and they've been working at it nonstop. Yes.
Senator Ernst, you touched on this. Obviously, this is incredibly emotional for you personally, but what does it mean after so many years of trying at this to finally being here today and being able to come in?
It's a very personal issue for me, obviously, and as a survivor, and I think so many of the women that are here, both standing with me and those that are survivors in our audience, I think we can almost let out a sigh of relief. We need to get this over the finish line, and we will. I have full confidence that this is going to pass in the Senate, and I know that there were provisions that we didn't get into the bill, and this has been extremely important for me. And I have said all along that the point is not for it to be a political football to use as a tool during campaigns, but to do the right thing by survivors and to prevent violence in the future. So the point is to get it done and to work on the issues that we agree on and then come back and keep working on the issues that we haven't been able to solve yet. So for me, I'm extremely grateful to my colleagues, to the supporters I have had through the years, and hopefully, again, prevention is one of the biggest issues for me, because if we don't prevent, lives are changed forever. You cannot go back once an incident of sexual assault or violence has happened. But what we can take is a little bit of hope, wrap it into this bill, and get it over the finish line.
One more question.
Is the plan to move forward with this bill as soon as you get those 10 Republicans locked in? And also, do you have a sense of whether the House is ready to move quickly?
I wish I could. I can't report on the House. I don't know where they are in the process. And Senator Schumer is just looking for a signal that we have 60 and we can pass the bill. And so when we return from the President's Day recess, we hope to be able to report to him quickly. A couple more. Go ahead.
On getting those 60 votes, is Senator Lujan's absence in the Senate impacting the rate at which you can move on this legislation?
Well, it's part of the consideration in a 50-50 Senate. And when you need 60 votes, we want as many members as possible who are voting yes on the floor, and he's a yes vote. Last question.
I was just curious, how important is it to have this bill passed before the appropriation omnibus comes up to the floor?
Donates.
As a member of the Appropriations Committee, I don't want to slow that process down at all, but I don't think it's an either-or situation. We need to do both of them. They're both very, very important. Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you. Joni, thank you.
I'm glad it's over. Good, we got something.
Great. Sweet. Super. So very much.
Jody, good job.
We love your team, yes.
Thank you so much for everything.
I know, I know they need